All right. Dan Masnada,
Here.
Sandra Cattell,
I'm here.
Stacy Fortner, Stacy, I saw you. Stacy? I've now clicked to ask her to unmute. All right, moving on. Dennis.
Oh, I am having trouble with my button. I am here. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Dennis Ostrom.
Here.
Steve Sly.
Here.
Matt Carpenter.
Here.
Eric Adair.
I'm here.
Holly Schroeder.
Present.
Great.
Okay. Moving to item 2 for public comment and the procedure described above. Tara, do we have any public comment?
I don't see any yet. Everyone is able to unmute. Does anyone have any public comment? Now is the time to speak up or raise your hand. Seeing none, we can continue.
Okay, moving on to next items. 3.1 is the approval of the minutes from our May 6th meeting. Ask for a motion and a second.
This is Eric. I'll move to approve.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Steve, I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. Any comments, corrections, changes? All right, Tara, for the vote.
Absolutely. Dan Masnada.
Here. Yes, sorry.
Sandra Cattell.
Yes.
Stacy Fortner. Do you want to just put in chat? I'll accept chat.
Let's go on while she figures that out.
All right. Dennis Ostrom.
Yes.
Steve Sly.
Yes.
Matt Carpenter.
Yes.
Eric Adair.
Yes.
Holly Schroeder.
Yes. Okay, item 3.2. I think Tara might introduce, but Rick Bergutz is going to do a update on yet another technical memorandum. So Tara, Rick, over to you guys.
Leave it to you, Rick. All you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, Chair Schroeder and committee. I do have a presentation. It's about 20 slides, and it summarizes the draft tech memo that was sent out earlier. And let me toggle to share my screen here. And, okay, there we go. Can you see the presentation? All right. So we have a presentation today. It follows the technical memo that we delivered, and let me just jump right into it. So we've got a handful of topics today. We'll show you the same slides on the GSP development process, and then we'll talk about some of the content in the memo, what the basin-wide management actions are, then we'll talk about examples, and then we can have discussion after that. Okay, you've seen this chart before. We are building those blocks, as you have said, Chair Schroeder. Today, we're talking about projects and management actions, the black box. These boxes that are surrounded in gray, we've hit those pretty hard, as you know. And coming down the line, and we have an item on this following item 3.1 today, or excuse me, 3.2, a special meeting on the 29th of July. So we'll talk about that then, but on July 16th, we're planning to provide your committee the administrative draft of the GSP. And we'd like to get your comments on the 29th. And then after that, on August 16th, we'll release the draft GSP valley-wide. And then it will make its way towards the board. You've seen this graphic before too. These are the steps, and we're doing great. We're cooking on these. We've been through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're talking about number 6 today, projects and management actions. As you know, these are the kinds of things that are needed to address undesirable results and fill data gaps and ensure that we make our way towards sustainability to the extent we're not already there. After that, after item 6, after our discussion today, we will brief the GSA board in July, and perhaps we'll have some iteration either after today or after we talk with the board, and we'll keep you posted on that. Okay, overview. So the draft memo goes into a number of different details, but I think it can largely be summarized by these 2 bullet points. It has key information about the basin, what we know about the wells, the potential for undesirable results, and it talks about steps that are going to be taken to improve sustainability, monitoring, analysis, how responses to potential undesirable results would work. And we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. So basin-wide management actions, the tech memo that we released has these 6 actions in it. You can take a minute and read through those. And what I'll do is I'll spend a few minutes talking about each of these, and then we'll keep on going and help fill in the blanks for your committee and get your input. So data gaps, oh yeah, we've got them, all basins do. And what data gaps are areas where we just don't have the bulk of the information that we'd like to have for managing the basin. And so this memo that you have talks about filling in some of these data gaps through installing piezometers, which are essentially small diameter monitoring wells. We need to do that in the area of the GDE monitoring and potentially other areas. We're looking at 6 to 8 piezometers to help us understand water levels in and around the river system better. Elevation survey, yeah, we need that. We need to get the elevations of the new wells, double check the elevations of the old wells, and look at the elevations of the riverbed in the vicinity of these GDE monitoring points. With that information, we can have a better understanding of how far below the ground surface or the riverbed the groundwater table is. Domestic well water quality, data gaps. We would like to have private well owners, domestic well owners help with some of the water quality monitoring. We mentioned this last time. One of the things that's on the technical team's plate to do is to provide your committee a map showing generally where we'd like some help with domestic well water quality monitoring. So that's on our plate. But just know that's something that we'd like to include, and we'd like your committee's input along the way with that. Maybe you've got suggestions on how best to do it or how best to reach out to the private well owners. Monitoring land surface for subsidence. We have learned a great deal over the last several months on this. The County of LA actually has a series of benchmarks, elevation points throughout the basin that they monitor, but they don't monitor them that frequently. They monitor them about every 6 years. And so that's not really frequent enough for what we're looking for with the GSP. And so we'll want to monitor those more frequently in the future. And we're also doing a deep dive into the historical data on that big data set that the county has. monitoring, reporting, outreach. So we're going to need to do additional work with domestic water quality monitoring, the GDE monitoring, subsidence monitoring. We've got groundwater extraction data from non-de minimis well owners. That's a lot of words, but what we're talking about are not the municipal wells, because those wells are metered. We're talking about wells like agricultural wells, or perhaps wells that supply water to golf courses or maybe a cemetery. The amount of water pumped from these wells is not trivial. And we understand that some of the well operators may already be measuring the extractions. And so we want to coordinate with them to include that extraction information into the database and into the flow model, so we can continue to improve our understanding of the basin. And so this committee has a number of well owner representatives on it. And so we want to work with you to see what ideas you have to help fill that data gap and get that information. Best water use practices. We are, living here in Southern California, we're all keenly aware of water conservation. Certainly the municipal entities do a lot of outreach with conservation, but we are recommending the GSA perform additional outreach to private well operators regarding water conservation. These are well operators that I'm certain know about water conservation, but they're not covered by an existing conservation program that we're aware of. So we're recommending outreach there. This is a slide to show you we're halfway through these 6. So we've got 3 more to go. So we'll talk about minimum thresholds, the GDE action triggers, and the other management actions and projects next. So we've had a lot of discussions with your committee on minimum thresholds. We want to talk a little bit more about what happens if they're reached. So recall that the minimum thresholds are things like water levels in a well, but they could also be ground surface elevations, or they could be a water quality parameter. But the point is, if we reach those minimum thresholds, we need to evaluate what's going on, what the cause is. We need to look to see if it's from groundwater extraction, and importantly, we need to look at the trend. Is the trend leading towards more exceedances of the minimum thresholds and potentially undesirable results? If that's the case, then management actions would be called upon. So we'll show some examples of that, or I'll show some examples of that a little bit later. We've also had a number of questions from your committee about drought, and how does a GSA respond to drought? And we need to do a better job communicating that. And so, because there are multiple factors that cause the water levels in the basin to go up and down, teasing out exactly why they're going down compared to drought versus pumping is going to be complex in certain cases. But what I want your committee to know is that if the water levels fall beneath these minimum thresholds, we're going to perform an evaluation to determine why. It might be primarily due to pumping, it might be primarily due to drought, it might be something in between, but the point is we're going to look at why that's happening, and we're going to look at whether or not that trend is expected to continue to where undesirable results take place. And if it doesn't look like it's going to continue, then the GSA may defer implementing management actions and continue to evaluate it. But if the trend is looking like it's going to continue to undesirable results, then management actions would be implemented. So that's how that works. And we'll have a little bit more discussion on that today. So now we're going to talk about some specifics on what would happen if the minimum thresholds are reached for the sustainability criteria. We've talked with your committee about the 5 criteria. There's only 4 bullets here. The first 2 criteria are on the same bullet: chronic lowering of groundwater levels and reduction in storage. And then we'll talk about depletion of interconnected surface water, and then water quality and subsidence. So minimum thresholds is what we're talking about. We're not going to talk about GDE triggers until we get through these slides, and then we're going to move on to those triggers. So let's talk about groundwater levels and reduction in storage. So if we begin to see that minimum thresholds are being reached in some of the wells, we're going to evaluate the cause. Why do we do that? Because we want to know what's causing it, because with that information, we can look at whether or not the trend is expected to continue or perhaps abate or reverse. So look at the cause, look at the trend, and if undesirable results are anticipated, then management actions would be taken. The slide shows a couple, or it shows 4 management actions. You'll see these repeated in other slides today, so we'll talk about them briefly here. Redistributing or reducing pumping. That would be done to manage water levels in a particular area, to allow the water levels to rebound some to avoid reaching those thresholds. We could bring in additional surface water and cause releases from Castaic Lake to help the alluvial system downstream from the lake to help bring water levels up. We could import water, either state water or water from the banks, to help provide supplemental water so we could reduce pumping in the basin, and we could even implement water conservation measures. The bottom line is all these things are designed to allow the water levels in the basin to come back up. Depletion of interconnected surface water. So in this case, we're using the same minimum thresholds with chronic lowering of groundwater levels and chronic decline in storage. And the management actions would be the same with lowering water levels and chronic depletion in storage. So the previous slide I showed you that talked about redistributing pumping, bringing more water in, that's what we would do if these minimum thresholds were reached for depletion of interconnected surface water. Recall though, that the real significant issue here with depletion of interconnected surface water is the GDE issues, right? So our primary focus is looking at the groundwater dependent ecosystems. There's a special GDE monitoring program that has been developed, and it includes these triggers based on historic lows or levels slightly higher than those. Degraded water quality is another one of our criteria. Again, what's the cause? What's the trend? We may coordinate with regulatory agencies to see what they know about this. But if undesirable results are anticipated, then management actions would be taken. You can see what actions are included here. We're looking at alternatives to improve water quality, potentially wellhead treatment, alternate supplies, move pumping around, or perhaps even stop pumping near the affected area until we have a better understanding or until treatment can be put in place. Subsidence. I know you're all seeing the pattern, so we'll look at the cause, we'll look at the trend. If we anticipate undesirable results, then we'll take management actions. Like some of these others that we've talked with you about, we'll look at reducing pumping, we'll look at additional water releases, additional imported water, things that help take the stress off the groundwater system and allow it to recover. So that's the approach, looking at minimum thresholds, what we would do if they're reached, and the kind of management actions that would be implemented. So Now putting on our different hat, if you will, the GDE triggers. So we've got a series of these triggers up and down the river corridor, largely based on the historic low groundwater elevation, but upstream from I-5, where we understand some particularly sensitive habitat exists, we're suggesting the trigger be 2 feet higher. The evaluation process takes multiple steps. We went through this a lot at our last meeting, but the steps look at, okay, what's going on? What's the trend? What's the nature of the habitat, et cetera. And an evaluation would be done and communication to the GSA board made. And if the trend is toward undesirable results, then again, management actions would be called upon. You see the same types of things here: redistributing pumping, bringing in more water, conservation, outreach to well owners, and even looking at additional projects. So a lot is included here with the GDE program, but you'll see the management actions are pretty similar to the others that you've seen. But there are other things taking place too within the GSP and within GSP implementation. There's tons of ongoing agency coordination. Boy, there's more overlap than I think we would expect, but it's okay. The entities are coordinating well. The municipal entities coordinate with the state regulatory groups. The municipal entities and others are involved in LA County's Safe Clean Water Program, where they're looking at ways to help improve sustainability in the basin, looking at things like stormwater recharge. Members are also included in the Integrated Regional Water Management Program. So there's a lot of coordination, and through that, there will be opportunities for the GSA to weigh in on things and possibly partner with these other groups. Removal of invasive species, that never goes out of style. The invasive species use a lot of water. They crowd out high quality habitat. And so the GSA would be looking at these in its plan as a solution to help with the basin. These other items are more engineered type solutions, managed aquifer recharge projects. These all help improve the resiliency of the basin to drought. There's work going on with evaluation of a recharge site at the Castaic School site. There's been a lot of work done there. We've done borings, some local aquifer testing. We're also looking in the eastern end for recharge. There are some more logistical issues with the eastern end, but we're still looking there. Potable water recharge is an item that was brought up. As I mentioned last time, it's something that Dirk had mentioned, and the idea would be that if we have some excess potable water, there is a water line that moves down Placerita Canyon, and perhaps some of that water could be used to decrease drought stress on some of the trees in that area. Off-stream recharge with recycled water. A lot of work has been done with these. The idea being that recycled water could be brought into areas of the basin and recharged. Off-stream storage, though, meaning not in the body of the stream. And not on this bullet list, but as we're just talking about it, there's also a potential to bring in other water into other stormwater recharge projects in the valley, such as what the city and county are implementing, ways to add water to those projects as well. So that's not on the list, but there are other options. And then aquifer storage and recovery. This can take many forms, but for now, just think of it as wells that inject water into the aquifer and raise water levels up. and also allow water to be extracted. So these are where we store and recover water. These are potential projects that have been looked at, will continue to be looked at, and could provide benefit to the GSA simply because they improve resiliency to drought. So next steps, public workshop. We'll have a public workshop on the draft management actions and project tech memos in June, and then we'll have a wrap up with your committee in June. So we're interested to get your feedback, of course, today on the presentation and the content, to the extent you have ideas that we can use to and consider to communicate this better. And then releasing the administrative draft to your committee in July. That's going to be here before we know it. We will include in that release to you key changes from older drafts in the transmittal. I know that's something that's important. It's something that one of your committee members brought up, Mr. Masnada. And so we want to communicate with you the key changes from older drafts when we release that admin draft to your committee. And that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you have and talk about these things.
All right, I have two questions. I think Sandra was slightly before Dan.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions. The first one is you talked about data being collected every 6 years.
Yes.
From our subsidence monitoring. How often do you propose the monitoring should be?
Annually.
Annually, thank you. And the next question I had, you talked about, if we're having problems and we determine it could be from a drought, that we would import more water. However, in a drought, the amount that we get from the state project would already be reduced. So how do you balance that?
That's a good question. And a couple things. The banking programs that SCV Water has can import water during drought if the state water project doesn't have the capacity. And there are times when local drought may not necessarily result in such a curtailment for imports, but Dirk could answer that question more if we want to dig deeper on that, Sandra.
I think I could call Dirk and let him explain what he will explain in detail. I do have one more question though. You talked about, again, the use of potable recharge. And we do have water coming from, obviously, sanitation district, but we have some, what I think is pretty clean water coming from the Whitaker-Bermite area. And I did have a question, does it have any PFAS, have they discovered PFAS in that discharge? And would that be a possible useful discharge to be able to use in a severe drought to stop subsidence or lowered groundwater levels?
Well, it's certainly not a trivial amount of water, right, Sandra, that is pumped and treated at that site. I'm not aware that there's PFAS in that discharge. To my knowledge, well, I haven't seen information that there is PFAS in it.
Okay, well, I haven't either, which is why I asked if that could be used.
Maybe others will know that. And then in terms of using it, I suppose it's possible. The water is already going into the river, as you know, upstream from where the Saugus plant discharges. And so it's already creating some recharge. Could it be taken somewhere else if the water quality was right? I suppose it could, but we'd have to work with the regulatory agencies that are tracking how that discharge is managed. But good question.
Thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question. This is Dennis Ostrom.
Uh,
How often will you be taking subsidence related readings?
We propose to take them at least annually by surveying the county's benchmark data that it already surveys. So that would be the approach. We're also looking at using what's called INSAR data, which is a satellite-based ground elevation monitoring program. But that is that would be another stream of data that we could use as that satellite data becomes available. But we would make the best use of looking at the existing benchmark data and looking at the historical trends, and we'd want to bump that up to annual monitoring.
I don't know if that's often enough. Subsidence is there's some elasticity, but then there's plasticity that you want to stay away from. And once that plasticity starts, it's not linear. It's probably some kind of a power factor. Once it's failing. It's not necessarily following the water. It's the structures have sort of lost their resilience.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what we could do, and I didn't articulate it very clearly, but annual monitoring would sort of be our base monitoring. But if we saw trends, we would increase the monitoring in those areas. So I think we get into when is the best time to do the monitoring, and how quickly do we want to come back and do follow-up monitoring if we see changes. So if we saw changes, we would want to come back frequently and track those. And then based on the evaluation of the cause, we may implement management actions at that point, Mr. Ostrom. So it's a great comment. A year might not be enough. Annually might not be enough.
Rick, can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, hi. Just something else to add, Dennis, is that, as long as we're operating the basin within historical range of water levels, we're not expecting to see subsidence. It's only during certain periods when we have, drought and we have higher levels of pumping in the future, where those water levels would go below what we've observed in the past. During those periods, we could consider increasing the frequency of the monitoring also, just to add that to the mix.
Thanks,
Yeah, I
Jeff.
think it would be very pragmatic.
Okay, and finally, Dan, before we get another question. Dan's been holding his hand up for a while.
Thank you. Actually, I do have a question, but there were a couple of things that were just raised that I'd like to address. Jeff answered it in part, but also in regards to subsidence, the geology locally is such that it's not, subsidence isn't a big issue. It really hasn't been an issue. I don't think it will be, but between the point that Jeff made and just the nature of our geology, subsidence is pretty far down the list as far as potential issues. Ultimately, Dennis, I think monitoring once a year will be more than adequate. But as Rick mentioned, or as Jeff mentioned, that'll be adjusted accordingly if there is any evidence of subsidence. Because if you look in the past, there have been levels of pumping greater than what's going on right now. and subsidence hasn't occurred. The other thing, Sandra, you mentioned about, well, if you've got a drought locally, you'll also have it with the state water project. At least historically, things may have changed a little bit with climate change. And so I can't speak to the current situation, but historically in the past, 70% of the time that there was a severe drought in Northern California, the drought conditions weren't severe in Southern California and vice versa. So the fact that there may be drought conditions locally may not necessarily coincide with what's going on up north. But then again, the additional point that was made about the banking programs and utilizing water from the banking programs also helps in those situations where both the imported water supply and the groundwater supply are impacted by drought. The question I was going to ask, I read the tech memo. The one item, and the one item that I kind of paused at was providing water for the Placerina Nature Center within the context of the GSA. If pumping is not causing that condition, and once again, it's a natural condition, whether it's climate change or drought, why would that be within the purview of the GSA, for lack of a better word? The point being, if it isn't, we're using state water and even more expensive banked water, because it's a combination of state water and the costs associated with banking and extracting it from the banks to address a condition that isn't necessarily covered by the GSA.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you're right. It's not something that is squarely required that the GSA implement. It's something that would be an optional project that could have benefit locally. But I hear you. So it's an optional concept that we're looking at.
Thanks. I think the board needs to be aware of that and make a decision accordingly, because ultimately, hey, I'm not saying don't do it. It may be a question of the funding source or the proper forum to address that particular issue.
Right.
Thanks.
Fair point.
I think all I'm saying is that if you take readings more often, you can see it happening. If you take them less often, you can see the failure after it's happened. That's all I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that, Mr. Ostrom. More frequently is always better if there's changes taking place, and so we'd have to time it.
Oh yeah, I
make sure we're not missing anything.
Again, how are the readings taken? Are they someone going around with a notepad and writing it down, or are these electrical sending devices? Or
the county's benchmark program is made up of benchmarks on the ground that are manually surveyed. So it's not it's not done with sensors or anything like that. It's a survey crew that goes out.
If you get satellite, yeah, okay, yeah, it'd be impractical.
Oh, yeah. I might have misunderstood you. Were you talking about the county benchmarks or the satellite data?
Well, all the data.
Okay.
If the satellite data you can take more frequently.
Perhaps the state does use the INSAR data, and we've looked at that to date. So yeah, we would take as much of that as we can to look for trends.
That would be good.
Yeah.
I can just add to that the the satellites are actually passing over many times a week and collecting the data. The issue is the processing and posting of the information, how frequently that occurs. And I personally don't know that, but I believe it's more frequently than once a year.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be using it to spot something, I'm assuming that you could probably put instructions in. I mean, something as important as this, I think you could request that such and such sensitivity be given to the data whole, and to feed back to any kind of accuracy that you want and it can provide. I mean, what are they there for?
You know, Mr. Ostrom, we'll follow up on that. That's a really good point. Is what would it take? You know, would the people that run that program entertain different resolution or more frequent analysis in the basin? That's a great suggestion. And we won't know unless we ask, right?
I think on the technical level, they would just love to have purpose.
We'll chase that down. It's a great idea.
And Stacy has a question.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing the peer review data. When are we going to get to see that?
The peer review data is, so the answer is when. It may be a couple months before the report is completed. But if there's interest, we could provide an update to your committee at a future meeting and go through the peer review process and the information we've gleaned so far in a little bit more detail. But the actual report is probably 2 months out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sandra has a question.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't ask these earlier. First of all, Dennis, I appreciate your bringing up the issue of monitoring subsidence. And I wonder if there's some sort of way we can program in a trigger if there is any change in elevation, subsidence elevations, that it would immediately trigger a response, and you could figure out what level, you know.
That's, I think it'd be very simple. I mean, if you look at the Baldwin Hills dam failure, they actually had subsidence being measured, and it's a you can, by the change of the slope of the curve. If it's straight, it's not subsiding, and if you get a significant angle change, like maybe 1/2 of 1 degree or something like that, and then you want to take a closer look at it, because it only increases.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one other question. In the materials that were sent out, in section 9.3, there was some discussion of charging fees for water extraction, or the possibility of charging fees. So I'm wondering how somebody's going to be charged, or who's going to be charged. Do I have a non-connection fee? Should I be using my well, which I'm actually not using? Would I be charged, say, for 1,000 gallons a month? Would there be a fee on that if I just use it to water a row of native plants? If I had water rights, is that a difference? And then I was thinking of places like, say, Disney Ranch, who pump water, but then they also use their water when we fight fires. Are they going to be charged an extraction fee for water that they're using to fight a fire in my backyard?
Mhm.
So those are my questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I appreciate you asking those. Section 9.3 goes into the various authorities provided to the GSA. And we're listing those out so your committee is aware of them. But right now, there's no plan to assess an extraction fee. But if the GSA determined a fee like that was needed in order for basin management, it could do that. But I think that's a future discussion, Sandra, that we don't have enough information to take that on right now.
There's a lot of precedents in states like Colorado.
For extraction fees.
Oh, yeah. Just outside of Denver in the hills.
Okay. And do they use those fees for, I assume, basin management or bringing in new water or something like that?
It's not as large of a municipality as, and they don't have the resource, the different resources that we have here. But they monitor your wells, your well waters, your private well waters. It's adjudicated just like our water is adjudicated. And it's really for the good of the people, basically.
This is Dan. Extraction fees in the valley, you'd really have to think about who would be, where the fees would be assessed. Because if you're looking at the private pumpers, leaving out the big guys, it's all of 1,000 acre feet a year. So, you'd have to really think about what's the purpose of the fees and who's going to be paying them, because I could list the big players on aside from the water agencies, because I doubt if you'd be assessing a pump tax on the agency, and that just leaves Newhall Land, the Honor Farm, and I'm thinking about what might be the third largest. It might be the individual pumpers. I don't know if that gets you anywhere. But that, like Rick says, that deserves some thought. But I know how that would go over with the private pumpers, and I
know too.
Here.
Yeah, there'd clearly have to be a need that the GSA would put forward to assess any kind of a fee like that, and there would be a long discussion.
Well,
just wanted to put it out there that there are authorities and so good discussion on that.
All right. Any more questions?
Any other hands up?
I don't see any hands.
Well, I was going to ask a follow-up to the peer review reports. And if the reports are a couple of months out and you are planning on releasing whatever is our July target date, are we going to see the data before then? And will it be, I'm very interested in seeing it. And so I'm just wondering what is happening with the data that it would take 2 months to report on.
Well, the peer review process is it's composed, Stacy, of meetings with the peer reviewers and the modeler and back and forth discussions about specific components like the water budget or the model documentation report, more recently, the sustainable management criteria. And there's a lot of thought and analysis that goes in both on the peer reviewer part and the modeler's part in providing responses to their comments. And sometimes that takes a while because there may be tweaks in the model or checks that are done in the model. And so it's one of these things that unfortunately just takes time due to the complexity and the back and forth checking nature of it. But like I say, if your committee's interested, we could provide a more detailed update at a future meeting on that.
Okay, I'm interested.
Were there other questions? Comments? Then I think, Tara, we go to public comment.
We do indeed.
Do we have any public comment?
Any public comment? Now is the time. Hands raised or unmuted. Everyone is allowed to unmute themselves. It's a free for all.
Okay, hearing none.
Done.
Then I assume since there's no public comment, there's no additional committee discussion. So thank you, Rick. I mean, this is, we're getting into the meat part of, our actions, which is great. So
Good.
Appreciating the continued work and discussion that we're going to have as we continue to go forward towards the final draft. And with that, you're still up to talk
Yes.
about some of those next steps and our possible special meeting.
Yes, that's right. Chair Schroeder, we have another item 3.3. We're suggesting that your committee convene on the 29th of July to go over your review comments on the administrative draft GSP. Initially, we didn't build that into the schedule, but we realize it's such a detailed document, and unless we convene your group, you wouldn't be able to speak as a committee on the administrative draft. And so we're recommending a special meeting on the 29th. And so that's staff's recommendation. Chair Schroeder.
So I know that for me personally, I'm going to have a conflict, but that does not necessarily mean that Eric can't chair the meeting. But do you want others to chime in on their availability? Or
Yeah,
you
I
just-
also have a conflict.
And I have a conflict also.
All right, so that's striking. I'm sorry, I know this is not easy. Maybe we want to, I think the concept of adding the meeting, I don't think anybody's going to have an objection to that. We may just need to work a little bit on the date.
Right.
And try to see whether there's some surrounding days. I wonder whether or not you could send out one of those sort of doodle polls or something along those lines, so that we don't go have 500 emails.
Right. I will talk with Uni about a doodle poll. Sounds great. If Uni can do that, I'm sure that would be ideal. But understood. So concept, thumbs up, but date doesn't work. So we'll work on.
The committee, I assume, concurs with that.
Yes, sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
What's the general time frame for the meeting again?
Well, July 29th was the proposed date.
So late July, probably.
Okay.
Maybe you can find a window. And we might be, we've generally been doing our meetings in this afternoon slot, but perhaps, if there's no other way, you might want to throw out some earlier in day slots, just if that's the only way we can get something squeezed in. So maybe put out a variety of options and see how many we can get.
Okay, yeah, that's a great idea, Chair Schroeder. We'll do that. We'll get something figured out. I know it can be hard to find dates that work for everybody.
Yeah. Hopefully it's enough lead time, we can find something. With that, I think we move on to the item 4, which is to see whether there's any other agenda items. All right. With that, I believe we're adjourned. There's nothing else that we need to do. Tara, am I correct?
You are. That's
it.
Basically it.
So I want to just continue to thank the committee for their service. We are getting to the point where, doing the prep, reading some stuff in advance is going to be really critical to make sure we're pulling all these pieces together. So please continue to plan to do that before each meeting. And we will, I guess we will see you at our next meeting. So thank you everybody again for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.